Today we're going to talk about some conflict that was going on in the western part of the United States. Until the 1880s, cowhands led cattle from Texas to northern railroad stations on long drives. After the 1880s, sodbusters started fencing off land so that they could farm. Fenced off land and more railroad lines stopped the long drives.
So as we can see here, you have these cows and cowhands down here in Texas, and you've got a railroad town up north, about the Midwest, around Nebraska, and it wants to get to Chicago, where the meat packing plants are. So this is how it would go. The cowhands would, on the long drives, take their cattle all the way up to this railroad town. You load them on the train, into Chicago they go, and get turned into steaks. This is how things went for a long time before the 1880s and before the Homestead Act came into place and there was more settling out west. So once this happened, as you can see here, all these barbed wire fences get put up, and the cowhand's job is way more difficult, and they still do it for a while, but that way of life starts to end. And as more railroad lines became available, and as some cowhands decided it was just simpler to get land out in the west as well, they began fencing their own land off for ranches. You can see here that the long drives became unnecessary.
So, conflict with the Indians of the Great Plains became a focal point of westward expansion. For centuries, the Great Plains was home to many American Indian tribes. Most tribes were nomads who traveled far following their main food source, the buffalo. Railroads cut through Indian land. Railroad owners paid people to kill the buffalo so that Indians would stop following them. Indians could not live on the land without the buffalo. Many Indians were killed by the wars with American soldiers and diseases brought west by settlers.
So if you didn't know, this is an example of the buffalo, and the Plains Indians needed the buffalo for everything. They used the skin, they used the bones, they used the meat, everything. They used everything. And so when many buffalo were being killed, slaughtered, and left to rot in the plains, and almost driven to extinction, it was devastating to the Plains Indians, and it made it much harder for them to live on the Great Plains.
So, reservations were created. As more settlers in the West led to more conflict with the Plain Indians, the U.S. government created reservations. Reservations were lands given to the Indians where settlers were not allowed to go. Indians were not allowed to move out unless they changed how they lived. Treaties and protections given to Indians on reservations were often ignored. For example, if gold or other type of resources found on an Indian reservation, Americans would then take that reservation and move Native Americans to another reservation.
So you can see here in a map today, if you think about it, this whole country was once the land for the Native Americans, and now they only live as a tribe in places where you can see some color on this map. So this whole map was once Native American land. Now it's only these small places here where there's a little bit of color. This is where the reservations are.
So some legislation was passed called the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was passed in 1887. The Dawes Act encouraged American Indians to give up their traditional ways and become traditional farmers. The Dawes Act tried to Americanize many Native Americans. However, the Dawes Act failed. American Indians could not become U.S. citizens until 1924.
So you can see this is what the Dawes Act would try to do. This is actually a picture of the same man on the left. This is how he was when he was following his traditional way of life, following the buffalo nomadically, which means moving around, not being stuck in one place. And the Dawes Act tried to turn American Indians into what you see on the right, where they would be dressed in American style with tie and coat. Their hair was cut. They would be discouraged from speaking their own language. They would have to speak English. Their children had to be forced into schools. It was basically to completely change them and turn them into what we considered American citizens.
That's a basic overview of westward expansion in the United States.